A young man has had his house broken into and 2 of his laptops as well as a game console have been stolen. Several hours later, around midnight, he hears a noise coming from his garage. It sounds like someone's in there. As he hears a volley of bangs and the sound of rummaging, he's scared and not quite sure what to do. But he doesn't call the cops. Instead, he grabs his samurai sword and slowly creeps through his yard, his presence barely perceptible in the pitch-black night. When he gets closer to the garage, he sees that the door has been forced open. He slowly moves inside only for a burglar to attack him, at which point the man swings the sword. The upshot of that is a dead intruder and a homeowner looking at a lengthy stint in prison. The question is, should the man be charged with murder? Or what about involuntary manslaughter, seeing as he likely didn't intend to kill the intruder? Do you think the man didn't commit a crime at all? Do you think the killing was justifiable? Think about that for a second or two. It's not so easy to answer, is it? As you'll see many times today, sometimes you can lawfully kill someone, but it's usually a matter of intense controversy. The scene we just talked about actually happened. In 2009, a student at Johns Hopkins University took his sword and slashed an intruder who lunged at him after trying to steal from his garage. The sword was legally owned, and the cops later said anyone has the right to defend their property. The court found that the student reasonably believed he was in danger of death or serious bodily injury, and so he wasn't charged for killing the man. Would the same have happened elsewhere? It's debatable. In the UK, you can use reasonable force against someone who has broken into your house, and that includes picking up an object to use as a weapon, but it's very likely that if a student over in the UK slashed and killed an intruder with a sword, they'd have a harder time staying out of prison. It all depends on the circumstances. A court in the UK would have to hear that the person was in fear of his life and had a very good reason to believe that. The UK's Crown Prosecution Service states that if a person goes over the top in their actions, they're not protected by the law. As you'll see, going over the top in the UK and in the US might not be the same. In the US, you're also expected to not go over the top. If someone is, say, stealing flowers from your garden and you knock them out and then bounce large stones off their head, you're going to be prosecuted. Still, the US takes something quite seriously called the Castle Doctrine, which relates to the saying your home is your castle, and so you have the right to defend it by any means. How it's applied depends on which state the person lives in. For instance, in some states, you might get away with using deadly force even if you just found an unarmed intruder going through your collection of PlayStation games. In some other states, you might only have some immunity from prosecution if you can prove the intruder was about to inflict serious harm on you or your family. Some states may prosecute if the victim could retreat, but instead went on the attack, while other states fully embrace the stand your ground laws, wherein a homeowner has every right to attack even if there's the possibility of retreating. It's complicated, so let's have a look at some other controversial cases, and you can act as the judge and jury. An extremely sad and very divisive case involved a young Japanese guy named Yoshihiro Hattori. In 1992, he made the fatal mistake of going to Baton Rouge, Louisiana in the US to join an exchange program. After about 2 months, he was invited to a Halloween party as part of the program, and so he dressed up as John Travolta's character from the movie Saturday Night Fever. And that all sounds innocent enough, but Hattori and the son of the American family he was staying with got the location of the party wrong. Dressed up in strange-looking costumes, they rang the doorbell of the house. A woman answered the door to see a young American man dressed in bandages and another guy looking like he might have reminded her of the fictional gangster Tony Montana from the movie Scarface. She panicked and told her husband to grab his .44 Magnum. "We're here for the party," Hattori said innocently, now looking down the barrel of a gun once called the most powerful handgun in the world. The husband shouted, "Freeze!" which was an expression the Japanese student wasn't familiar with. He kept walking toward the husband, and then he was fatally shot. Okay, so you are the judge and jury. Was this a justifiable homicide? Was the husband's and his wife's life threatened? Was there going to be imminent violence used against him or his wife? Could he even have fired a warning shot? Do you think he was guilty of a crime? Well, the courts thought the killing was justified and the man was acquitted. This caused a huge stink in Japan as well as in the US among people who espouse stricter gun control laws. In fact, for years after, Hattori's family and the family of his hosts in the US campaigned for gun law reform. Not much ever really got reformed, as you're about to see. When it comes to defending your castle, the US could be said to embrace the use of deadly force more than most developed countries. But what if you intentionally plan to kill someone in the US? What if you set a trap for criminals? We saw that if it happens in the UK, the law will definitely not be on your side. It's usually the case in the US too, but not always. We might take the 2001 case of 2 brothers in Baltimore who shot one man dead and injured 2 others after they'd set a trap at the concrete plant they owned. The brothers were sick and tired of having the plant burgled. So one night they armed themselves and waited for the thieves. When the thieves arrived, the brothers opened fire. The men were not indicted by a grand jury, even though some law experts said the brothers were not in any kind of danger. You might be wondering, how does a jury assess a clear and present danger? Well, that's also complicated. In 2019, in the UK, a 79-year-old man was found to have lawfully killed a burglar. The man said a man had entered his home and was armed with a screwdriver. He said he confronted the man with a kitchen knife, after which the burglar just walked into the knife. The court ruled that the man had given the intruder every possibility to leave his house and he had only acted in self-defense. It doesn't always happen that way, not in the UK or the US or elsewhere. There was a recent incident in Scotland where a man's house was broken into and the burglar, armed with a knife, threatened to kill a man and his wife if they didn't hand over some money. A fight ensued and it ended with the burglar being stabbed 17 times. Okay, so it seems the burglar was armed and he was certainly threatening, and the man had every right to think he and his wife were in imminent danger. Even so, the jury found the man to have acted over the top and he was convicted of culpable homicide, meaning he killed someone but hadn't intended to do so. Similar cases have happened in the US too. In 2014, in the state of Montana, a man was found guilty of killing an intruder even though the state has the castle doctrine. In that case, a homeowner discovered a young man in his garage. He didn't ask too many questions and just opened fire. During the trial, it was revealed that the man had been the victim of burglary before, and so he laid a trap by leaving his garage door slightly opened. He even told a friend, "I've been up for the last 3 nights with a shotgun, wanting to kill some kids." The defense argued that the man had only been protecting himself and his family, but he was found guilty of deliberate homicide. Strangely, the 17-year-old that was killed was another exchange student, this time from Germany. So there have been cases where it looked like people went completely over the top but weren't convicted of a crime, and there have been cases where people seemingly acted in self-defense but were convicted. As we said, there's a lot of gray area. Possibly the weirdest case we could find that seems to defy any kind of reason happened in 2009. Some of the American press simply called it lunacy, further demonstrating that lawful killing is very controversial. In this case, a man was bored on Christmas Eve, so he decided to find a female escort on Craigslist. He talked to a woman, but they didn't go through all the services included in the fee. The parameters of services should always be discussed prior to payment being made, but that didn't happen. It turned out that the man expected more than a chat at his house for the $150 he paid. The 23-year-old woman stood up and said she was going, which infuriated him. He thought he'd paid for sexual services, which was actually illegal in Texas and still is. The woman managed to get into her driver's car, but the man chased after it while firing a gun. He hit the woman in the head and neck, which paralyzed her. She died from her injuries several months later. Surely, that was a clear-cut prosecutable crime. The jury acquitted the man because it was deemed that his property had been stolen. It was found that he used deadly force on a person who was in the commission of stealing from him. As some US media later pointed out, does that mean if you advertise something for sale and someone turns up to buy it, they have the right to return with their gun if they find out what you sold them was not worth the price they paid for it? Yeah, that doesn't sound right at all. Okay, let's move on. You won't be surprised to hear that you can lawfully kill a person during a war or in conflict when you're hired to do so, but you can't always just kill with impunity. You shouldn't kill non-combatants. There's something called Ordre Kumba, which is international law and relates to times when you can't lawfully kill people in a conflict situation. So if a soldier is lying on the ground disabled after being hit, you cannot by law finish him off. You shouldn't kill someone jumping out of an aircraft that's going down, and you shouldn't kill a prisoner of war. But of course it happens. In 2020, the UK media talked about British special forces in Afghanistan. An investigation found that during night raids, the special forces would look for the Taliban, but it seems that's not only what they were looking for. They also killed quite a few unarmed innocent civilians. This is called a war crime, and it seems in Afghanistan both the US military and the Australian military have committed their own war crimes. A notable war crime was that of US Army Staff Sergeant Robert Bales, who in 2012 went on a killing rampage. He murdered 16 civilians in Kandahar province in Afghanistan, many of whom were just children. He's now serving life without the possibility of parole. Those were unlawful killings since the enemy wasn't killed. But there's more gray area regarding this topic. There are rules of warfare, but they don't always apply. Let's say the military wants to take out a terrorist leader, but by doing so, there will be some innocent bystanders that get hurt. This happens, and it happens a lot. And almost always, no one is held accountable. So we could call this getting away with murder. According to a nonprofit human rights organization called Reprieve, for every person the US tries to assassinate, 9 innocent children will die. In fact, it's thought that the failed assassination attempts on Egyptian terrorist Ayman al-Zawahiri led to the deaths of 29 innocent bystanders and 76 kids. Some people call this kind of state-sponsored murder, but others say it's just the unfortunate consequence of fighting a war on terror. It's hardly a one-off, though, when innocent people get hurt during targeted attacks. Leaked Pentagon documents showed that in one drone program that lasted 5 months in 2013, 90% of the strikes didn't hit the intended target. That doesn't necessarily mean the strikes only hit civilians, simply that the intended target wasn't present. As for how many collateral deaths there have been over the last decade or so, it's very hard to say. Not many people in the know would deny that hundreds of civilians have died as a result of targeted killing, and no one's going to be arrested for it. In 2016, the UK Prime Minister called such strikes an act of self-defense, while the US has been accused of secrecy and having impunity. Under Obama, US officials said the bombing was lawful, but as was pointed out, the laws were written out of sight to the public and even Congress. One must always question, however, how much life was spared by the killing of terror VIPs, even if innocent life was taken in the attempts. That's an extremely gray area, and it doesn't help that terrorists often purposefully use civilians as human shields. Most times, those same civilians know they're being used as shields, so does that now make them enemy combatants if they have full knowledge they could be targeted and are being used? Welcome to the gray zone. You could call the next part of this video almost lawful killing. You've heard about honor killings, notably in the countries of Iran and Iraq. We found a fairly recent case in Iraq when a bride was sent back to her family because the groom complained she wasn't a virgin. The reports say a relative killed her because she had dishonored the family. A man was actually arrested for the murder, but the reports say his sentence will be very short because he killed in the name of honor. We found another case in Iraq where a father shot and killed 2 of his daughters and badly injured a 3rd daughter. He'd accused them of not being virgins, and it turned out he was very wrong. His sentence? 2 years. That sounds close to lawful murder. On the other hand, if a person in the West has suffered terrible domestic violence and they kill the perpetrator of that violence, in many cases they might receive a lenient sentence. That said, most of the time they'll still do time behind bars. We found some data from an Australian university that told us over a period of 20 years, women who killed their husbands after years of domestic violence usually went to prison for the crime of manslaughter. Few were sentenced to murder, and even fewer were acquitted. In such cases where a person has been abused, their defense might invoke what's called a provocation defense. If a person can prove circumstances led them to explode and murder a person, they might receive a reduced sentence, but they rarely get an acquittal. A well-known case of a woman who was acquitted after murdering her spouse was the case of New Yorker Barbara Sheehan. She shot and killed her violent husband during one of his rampages. She said she was protecting herself and her kids. Her use of deadly force was deemed lawful. We found some other cases when a wife's killing of her husband was found to be justified by the courts, but again, this is quite unusual. We aren't going to talk about capital punishment because we think all of you are aware in a few countries in the world, it's still legal to execute a criminal. One thing you might not be aware of is something called euthanasia. You have active euthanasia, and it's currently legal in the countries of the Netherlands, Belgium, Colombia, Luxembourg, Western Australia, and Canada. This is like someone asking to be professionally killed. An example we can give you is of a British guy who was the victim of a horrific acid attack by a jealous girlfriend. The attack left him almost blind, paralyzed, and in constant pain. All he could do was lie down and suffer, only able to move his tongue. He wanted to be euthanized, but that isn't legal in the UK, so he was taken to a clinic in Belgium. There, 3 consultants agreed that his life was unbearable. He was given a lethal injection into his heart, and he was gone. Passive euthanasia is very different and is legal in many more countries. That's just not giving a person something that's keeping them alive, possibly drugs or the use of a machine. Then you have something called assisted suicide, something sometimes called a mercy killing. Imagine someone you love dearly is terminally ill and in constant pain. Imagine they tell you they want to die. Maybe they say they'll do it the hard way if you don't help them. In a handful of countries and in some US states, a medical professional can legally help with this kind of killing. They can give the person drugs they can administer to themselves, which will result in death. In some cases, the drugs can be administered by someone else, and that's why we call it lawful killing. It's still a very touchy topic in the US, hence it's not legal in most states. Now you need to watch brothers confess to murdering parents, but are they innocent? Or for something completely different, I was swarmed by fire ants and survived. True story.